Since April the 27th, people all over the world have engaged in a massive deep dive into the life and tragic death of Micah Frances Miller, a 30-year-old worship singer, aspiring missionary, and the estranged wife of John Paul Miller, the pastor and founder of Solid Rock Ministries in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Driving this search for answers is a need to understand how the young woman who sounded so hopeful and full of faith in her social media posts fell into such despair that it led her to take her own life. Despite the determination by law enforcement that Micah's death was self-inflicted, a great deal of controversy, speculation, and accusations continue to surround John Paul Miller. And the sentiment that he is somehow to blame for Micah's death, whether directly or indirectly, has yet to subside. I'm Callie Lyons with FITSNews, and today I'm joined by two people who've been leading the pack when it comes to following the many bizarre developments in this complex and multifaceted investigation. I'm joined by Robbie Harvey, content creator, and Jenn, research director for FITSNews. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, Robbie, why don't you start by telling me how you became involved in this case?
Well, I got tagged in the announcement video that you guys captured, and when I saw it, like everyone else, it was one of the most bizarre things that I've ever seen in my life. It didn't come off as a grieving husband. It didn't come off as someone who was very concerned about the death of his wife. It didn't come off as someone who even cared. It just felt weird. And then when I learned that he did this at the end of the service, that he hadn't even seen her body, that he hadn't even, it was just bizarre. And so I thought, man, something is up here. It doesn't make sense.
And Jenn, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, when Will got that initial, the tip in that we needed to look at this, and we got the video, I had the same reaction as Robbie. My jaw was on the floor. It was, at that point, I would have said one of the most bizarre things I had ever seen. But since the story has evolved, I can no longer say that because the whole thing is just full of jaw-dropping, what is happening moments. But yeah, I just remember thinking something is wholly wrong with what I'm watching, and it bothered me immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think our fascination is with Micah Miller or JP Miller, or their dynamic? Robbie, what do you think about that?
I think the fascination is that this is more than just Micah's story. I believe there's thousands and thousands of women and men that go through this, and it's perfectly legal. It's perfectly legal to verbally abuse your wife, allegedly. It's perfectly legal to do these things. And that's the main motivation behind this. I, from day one, have said that Micah pulled the trigger. But I've also said, let's stop asking who pulled the trigger and let's start asking why the trigger was pulled. And that's the key to this. And that's the reason why we keep diving deeper, we keep getting more information, and keep reporting on this story. To me, it's no longer about how Micah died, it's about why Micah died.
And Jenn, I know you and I have dug into layers upon layers of court records that spell out this campaign, if you will, of what appears to be alleged targeted harassment, stalking. And of course, that is what is believed to have, in theory, played a huge part. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially, I don't know if this story would have ever been on anybody's radar if John Paul Miller hadn't given that bizarre sermon and written that obituary that was bizarre. I mean, I think that drew people in initially, and I think they stayed because, you know, in Micah, you know, you see your little sister, you see your best friend, you see a woman that was, you know, reaching out. She was looking for help. And I think, you know, in my opinion, the system failed her. And that is, you know, if that is one thing that good that can come out of this, you know, and honor her legacy, is that I do think people are so much more aware of this type of abuse and control now. And I think I'm hoping that, you know, that movement towards legislation to prevent this really keeps that traction up. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in this story, I see, you know, Mike, when I initially saw her, you know, she broke my heart. I wished I had been there before she died to offer her help.
I'm so glad you said that, especially the little sister part, because it doesn't always remind us all a bit of that one friend we wish we could have helped, or that one person we knew was suffering, but we weren't sure of the extent of their suffering, or at least that's what it conjures for me. Is this is a very real thing, and people are dealing with it every day, and people know about it. And, you know, going back to John Paul and his sermons, we have hundreds of sermons on tape, which lays out his opinions on many things. He does not appear to be ashamed of this behavior. Is that your take on it, Robbie?
Uh, it's not that he's not even not ashamed, but he's open about it. I mean, the waitress that he left his phone number for, he was direct with her and said, "Hey, I'm a pastor of a church. Now, will you send me a bikini picture?" Like, he's just straight open with it. And he continues to be open with it since Micah's death. There are messages with women that where he's sending shirtless photos of himself with Micah's ashes around his neck. That is all you need to know. But then you add the sermons to it. First of all, he memorizes verses, but he doesn't know the Bible. It's plain and simple. But his life is in those sermons. Who he is in those sermons, and it's clear as day now. Unfortunately, I don't think people saw it before, but I think they see it now.
Yeah, Jenn, certainly the sermons have been fodder for. There's so much we could dig through sermons all day long and find out new stuff about John Paul.
The amount of time I have spent listening to his sermons is it's, you know, it was necessary to get a sense of what, you know, what he was like, and also what she was going through, because his sermons align with what, you know, Micah's family alleged she was going through. And so it was necessary as part of the reporting, but I mean, it was painful. It was just painful to watch in hindsight. And I can't even imagine being a member of the congregation and looking back now and, you know, thinking, how did I not see there was something wrong?
Good point. And of course, protesters continue to show up on a weekly basis at the church. The only arrest that we've seen at all was related to a congregation member sprinkling protesters with water. There are passions on both sides, I say, and they're not subsiding. Nothing's de-escalating that. As we move forward, Robbie, do you think? I know you have in your YouTube videos, and I watch so much Robbie Harvey these days, by the way, but I know you've said something is coming. Something is coming. Do you get the sense that something is coming that's going to calm the waters?
Yes. I believe justice is coming. I believe that the FBI would not spend this much time on a case like this if they didn't have something. I believe that they are all in. I believe the FBI is such a massive and complicated case that they are taking their time to make sure they get it right. But the FBI, I've spoken to sources where some of their interviews are over 2 hours long with witnesses, and I know from my sources they've interviewed, in my opinion, probably 20, maybe to 30 people that I just know of. So that gives you the amount of time that the FBI is spending on this, and so I just don't see them spending that much time on a case if there was nothing there. And it seems like every week more witnesses come forward. I spoke with 2 brand new witnesses last week and sent them straight to the FBI with vital information. It's just never ending. And so I truly believe justice is coming.
And really, we're talking about decades worth of victims in this case. Jenn, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I won't get into too much because I don't want to, a lot of these victims are very frightened. But I mean, the allegations go back many years that these individuals have been living with very traumatic and very, very tough things weighing on them. So yeah, I mean, I think, in addition to the federal investigation, which I think is very clear is ongoing, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things happen within other court systems outside of criminal.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess we can look for this to move forward on several tracks then, which is consistent with how the story has gone so far, right? On multiple tracks. Going back to John Paul's sermons and all the hundreds and hundreds of hours of tape, let me ask, when he was on News Nation and gave his exclusive interview recently, Robbie, did you find that interview to be consistent with the person giving those sermons?
Consistent with like just constant lying? Yeah. So yeah, it's consistent with John Paul Miller. It's just bizarre. And then he goes on camera and admits he lied. And then he texts Rich McHugh of News Nation after the interview and says, "Hey, I lied again." It's just bizarre. It is so bizarre for someone who professes his innocence and has nothing to hide. I just don't understand why there's constant lying. It just does not make sense.
And that interview was easily, like I said, this story, I've been covering Murdaugh for 3 years now, and I didn't think anything could get as weird as the Murdaugh story, and this story has easily topped it. And that interview was absolutely the most bizarre thing I have ever seen. I didn't want to watch it because I was so tired of listening to his voice, but I saw initial reviews of it and got News Nation sent out a teaser email, and I saw some of the clips and I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to watch this. And it was just he seemed I'm trying to look for the word. He seemed discombobulated, kind of like he was at the end of his rope, manic almost. I hate to describe somebody that way, but it was like up and down. And like Rich McHugh described the experience, he said he's done over 1,000 interviews, and this was easily the craziest. And it was like being on a roller coaster. And that's how I described it. He would ask one question and the answer was, it was all over the place, and he never answered the direct question. Kudos to Rich. He went right back in and said, well, wait, you didn't answer the first question I asked you. And then he'd answer the question and say, whoa, wait, I lied. And I'm like, what is what is happening right now? And
the way he describes Micah over and over again about what she went through and how she would bipolar, schizophrenic. but yet there's so much video evidence that he's describing himself. And we saw it in that interview. I mean, we saw it. It was all over the place. And yet we can't find any video evidence of Micah being this way or recordings or anything like this. And so it's just bizarre.
It is. Sorry. I'm sorry, Jen, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it completely. That's exactly the behavior that he describes in her is what I see in him. And granted, she's, no longer with us. I'm not a psychiatric professional. But all of her communications and everything I hear from her, she's calm, she's even, she seems tired, but I would be tired too if I was living in that constantly.
Any part of it would be exhausting.
Right.
Being a pastor's wife would be exhausting. Being a worship leader would be exhausting. Living with a man like that, potentially exhausting, right? There's a lot to it. I found it difficult to get past his body language. He's wearing his wedding ring in one hand.
Mm-hmm.
And in the other hand, he has this 20-sided die that he's playing with the whole time. And I just found that very strange. In addition to his words, which were, like you said, all over the place. And when he went from breaking down crying to screaming, oh, that's such a great question. I just felt so sorry for that interviewer.
I felt sorry. And then I was like, I was kind of slightly jealous. And then I was like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Because I can only imagine the text you must have been getting afterwards. Like, oh, wait, I'm sorry, I lied about that. I mean, I can see it. When he was talking about it, I can see those texts coming through because, I know Robbie's seen some of that too, where it's just back and forth. It's just bizarre.
It truly is. Hey, Robbie, you've got some cuties there trying to join you. Do they want to come say hi? We could not speak of any adult topics.
That's why I came outside, because my house is chaos.
Chaos.
Now they're following me outside.
Chaos.
That's right. Summertime. Mine are grown, so they don't come in for anything at this point.
Oh no, mine pop in and they're like, "What's going on?" I'm like,
"Yeah,
nothing. Clearly nothing. I'm not doing an interview."
Oh goodness. Well, it's just such a heavy topic. I just wanted to break it up. And kids, they take you right back to what's really important about life, don't they? Speaking of, Robbie, this has been an intense time, I would assume, covering something like this. It's very heavy. Has it changed you or changed your perspectives in any way?
I think the scary part is the world doesn't even know everything that myself knows. And I know Jenn knows some things that the world doesn't know. We haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg. And that's what's terrifying about this. And how, if everything that the Francis family accuses John Paul of it is true, and how could someone get away with something like this for decades is just beyond me. And I think multiple people, in my opinion, should be held accountable for what has happened. Again, once the public knows everything that allegedly has happened over the past several decades, they'll no longer ask who pulled the trigger. They'll simply know why the trigger was pulled, if it's all true. And it's truly heartbreaking. So yeah, I'm not going to lie, it wears on you. But there's no other option. You have to keep going and keep uncovering the truth. And that's what this is about now.
Is there anything you do or practice to protect yourself from that difficulty that these cases can bring?
You just kind of put your head down and keep going. You hope that the end is near, and we know it's a long process. It's going to be a couple of years, but you hope that the FBI will make an arrest soon if everything is true. You hope that their investigation will come out soon. You just kind of keep going and do your best. And you know, we all have families, but they're getting neglected during this time, no doubt about it. And there's a lot of crazy, like Jenn said, there's crazy things that are happening at all hours of the day. And that's what's wild about this story. If you really think that it's about to calm down, and then the next week it just gets crazier, and hopefully that will come to an end soon.
At FITSNews, we have a good friend who says, "Head down, not around."
Yeah, look down, look down,
That's right.
not around. Keep doing the
Yep.
thing. It
Yep.
is hard though, because I was talking to a therapist that I had connected with and through Robbie in this, and we were talking about mental health for first responders, just like completely off topic. And I said, what, because she handles a lot of things. Traumatic situations, and said, what does a therapist do when they need therapy? And she said, I'm a big, proponent of getting therapy, but there's not a lot of that for journalists. And a lot of these stories are very, very heavy. So I think, it's important to take care of each other too. One point Robbie texted me and said, this is really heavy. Like, this is hard. And it is. It is really, a lot of this is really heavy. It's really hard. And, working with individuals that are going through these ups and downs, that a story like this brings, it's just requires a lot of self-care and a lot of understanding and patience.
And let's be honest, there's also listen, there's a woman that's dead, and there's a lot of questions surrounding the reason why she's gone. So the safety of yourself and your family comes into question. We know that this man tracked his wife. We know it. We know he's being accused of awful things. If those things are true, then you certainly know that you become a target also. And that affects you.
I heard him name drop you on News Nation, Robbie, and I kind of cheered for you a little bit, but I also know that comes with, there's a back end to that as well.
Well,
Your
I
name.
mean, I personally believe John Paul Miller is one of the worst human beings I've ever seen in my life. That's my opinion. So going up against evil is not going to be easy. John Paul Miller knows the Bible, so he knows which verses I'm referring to when it comes to that.
Well, even the Bible says Satan knows the words, right?
I personally believe, just my opinion, that John Paul Miller is a evil human being, and will be considered one of the worst humans in American history.
Wow.
I was talking to a professional, somebody, a resource that a connection that I have regarding mental health issues, and she said, completely, this is not my expert opinion. She said, but I just want to say this. She said, I want you to be very, very careful, because in my life, there's very few times where I can say that I have seen evil. And when I see that man, I see evil. And she said, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know why I feel that way. But she said, I worry about your safety and the people reporting on this safety with him, because she said he's just bad. And I was like, it kind of chilled me to the bone.
Yeah, and he's let us know he'll go after journalists. That's been very clear from the beginning. Let me, I guess, get down to, it sounds like you both believe the law enforcement conclusion. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that.
I don't
What's the
know.
most,
For me,
you-
okay, this is just my personal opinion, is I don't have enough information to say that I can believe it. Whether I believe it's the most plausible solution that Micah Miller, it was self-inflicted.
Mhm.
In my heart, yeah, I know that that is the most plausible solution. But to me, the investigative report and narrative that they released is not enough for me to say, yeah, I 100% am confident in their conclusion. I just don't feel like the little information that we've gotten, while it is, as many would point out, more than we usually get in terms of a story. To me, with all of the questions, I don't feel 100% confident saying that I'm good with that conclusion. But that being said, yes, I do think that could be the most likely, scenario. In which case, I go back to who's responsible for her feeling that way, for pushing her to that point. And then I still think to myself, so many things about that day and about what happened still do not make any sense. And I don't know if they ever will. Why was she up there? Why did she take the route that she went? She was on her way to work. What made her switch? The money in her purse. I have so many questions that I don't know if I'm ever going to get answers, but those are the questions that make me hesitant to say that I'm comfortable with the conclusion.
Okay. And Robbie, what about you?
So we're talking about Robinson County, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you said she pulled the trigger. You're convinced she is the one that pulled the trigger. Is that right?
With the evidence now, yes.
Okay.
But as Jenn stated, there's still a lot of questions. I've proven in past videos that Robinson County had no clue that a divorce papers were filed. They had no clue that she had a protection order filed and he was served 2 days before. They had no clue about Micah's car. And where was it that day? Her original car. Why was it found in Charlotte 2 days later, north of where she died? They had no clue about these things. They had no clue about this stuff. They never formally interviewed people that were around the scene, potential witnesses. They just did not have a clue. And so I always refer back to what Micah's father said, Michael Francis. They did the bare minimum that was required underneath the law. That's it. They didn't go the extra mile to ensure what happened that day. And so, with the evidence that is there now, yes, I believe Micah did this. But as I've stated, let's ask why this happened.
Now, Jen said she doesn't know if we'll ever know. Robbie, do you think we'll ever have answers to these questions?
I think once everyone knows what's out there, once everything comes public, all the evidence in this decades long case or story, I don't think those questions will be relevant any longer. I don't think we'll really worry as much as who pulled the trigger anymore. That's what I believe.
Wow, that's an astounding statement.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's astounding, but yeah, I can see exactly what you're saying. I think, I think what happened to Micah, the semantics of the day, I don't think there's going to be as much questions about that, because you're going to see what she was really going through.
And let me say, and maybe y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but he was served on Thursday. He's now admitted that he contacted her 4 times the day she died.
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding that even when you're served, there's a no contact until the court hearing, correct?
I'd have to read through the papers again to.
I know it's that way in Florida.
Yeah, I'll have to read through the papers and check the law on that. But, I mean, even that, his admission of, I mean, she clearly
That's right.
didn't want to speak to him. You know, I've seen numerous references to where police had said, leave her alone. And he's still doing it right up until after, you know, he didn't know that she had passed away and he was still contacting
And
her.
he said in the interview, the News Nation interview, I made a promise that I would contact her every single day for 3 months straight, multiple times a day. That's what this woman went through the last 3 months of her life.
Yeah. And considering that protective order, it makes the whole raising her from the dead spectacle seem a little more off, even that he would have that kind of access.
I'm just gonna straight say it. I think he's just lying. He didn't.
No, that's a good point.
I mean, I don't think he ever tried to do that. That's just my opinion. Because if you watch the sermon from the day after she died, it's bizarre. It's like a different human. It's like he's relieved. And it's unbelievable. And I've told several people that, in my opinion, he's a different pastor once she's gone. And I don't think he wanted her back from the dead.
Do you think he believes his lies? Or does he just talk?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, he does believe them.
Yeah.
So like once he's like speaking it into truth.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah. And I think he forgets his lies and trips over them.
Yep. Like the interview where he says he's never used a drug, I was shocked. That was the one part of the interview he chose to lie, because then he quickly realized, there's way too much evidence out there proving otherwise, and he had to stop. And I was just stunned. And so what Jenn said, like, he's lied so much, he's now forgetting the lies. And he's lying on little things now like that.
And that's what, you know, in the follow-up interview that News Nation did with her family, you know, they said the more he talks, the happier they are, because it is all going to be admissible. It just is all stuff that can come up in court hearings to challenge his credibility. And it's certainly, like I said, legally, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch this.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you both for your time today, and also just ask you for your final thoughts or anything that we haven't touched on. And we'll start with you, Robbie.
I just don't get it. We haven't heard from one apology. We haven't heard any apology whatsoever, despite the evidence. We haven't, John Paul Miller says he's not in a relationship with Susie Skinner, but he knows his wife's feelings about her. He knows how it looks, yet he continues to be seen in public with her. He was seen just this past weekend with her, last weekend actually, at a concert with this wedding ring off. Despite, all of that, he goes against his wife's wishes post-death. He's no longer allowed to see his children. And he continues to not apologize. There's no remorse. There's no real explanation about anything. It just doesn't make sense. And so, like Jenn said, it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out in court. But she's right. The more he talks, it just feels like the hole continues to become one of the most massive holes we've ever seen.
Keep digging, Pastor John Paul. I think, to me, one of the very first interviews that I did after learning about the story was with one of her close friends. And she had said that Micah had stayed and she didn't talk to people about what she was going through with John Paul because she didn't want to interfere with others, relationship with God, because John
Yep.
Paul was a pastor. And she was afraid, if she told them about what she was going through, that would be impactful on their relationship with God. And when I heard that, it took me a second to process it. And I think, I'm not one of those overly religious people. I was, born, raised Catholic. But, when I heard that, it broke my heart. A lot of the things that, I've heard people say in the aftermath of this, that, all these churches and all these pastors are bad. Because I don't think that is ever that was what Micah was most afraid of. So I think, to me, in order to kind of honor her and her fears, I just wouldn't want people to, consider lumping all religious institutions into that negative. I mean, I think there are bad ones out there.
Yeah.
But this is an exceptionally horrible case. So, just.
And to add what Jen said, the Francis family sent me a text apologizing that I've been dragged into all of this, and they called it drama. And they said, Micah never wanted this. Micah never wanted all this drama about her divorce with him. And I said, no apologies needed. She's no longer here, so now we have to step up.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's just something that's always stuck with me, and something that I wanted to make sure I reiterated, because her story does break my heart.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to thank you both for your dedication to truth telling and for the commitment it takes for a story like this to receive the kind of coverage that you're giving it. I know I appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of viewers do. To our audience, you can follow Robbie Harvey on YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook. And of course, catch Jenn Wood's ongoing coverage at FITSNews.com. You can support our work by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and we sure appreciate it when you do. Finally, in the realm of human struggle, there are narratives that, while challenging to confront, demand our attention. Micah's journey embodies such a narrative, touching upon critical issues that resonate deeply with many. Mental health, domestic abuse, coercive control, stalking, harassment, and the grim specter of suicide. Yet, in these shadows of these distressing realities, there's an opportunity for awareness and support. And remember, in the face of despair, you're never alone. Despite the gravity of these challenges, help is within reach. Amidst the darkness, there are lifelines, resources tailored to aid those grappling with adversity and their concerned loved ones. So if you're in danger, call 911 immediately. And if you or a loved one are in crisis, call or text 988. I'm Callie Lyons for FITSNews.